Hi, I'm Perry Atkinson, General Manager here at theDove. Hey, check out our other videos and check out our website at thedove.us. Okay, welcome back, and what a delight for us today to just kind of go up the road a little bit to Portland and check in with Kevin Palau. He is the president of the Luis Palau Association, and he's authored a book called Unlikely, and what they did in Portland could be a model for many cities around the country. So we want to talk to you about that. Hi, Kevin. How you doing, my friend? Good to see you.
I'm doing well, Perry.
Hey, thanks for giving us some time. Well, fascinating story. What made you guys do this? And give us the story.
Well, Dad, for people that know anything about us, and I suppose, some people do, some don't. Dad is this wonderful Argentine evangelist who met Patricia Schofield, a native Oregonian, up at Multnomah School of the Bible 55 years ago or so. And so our heart is always to try to get the gospel out. So everything we do, if you dig deep enough, it's going to always come down to how do we communicate this timeless good news to a changing world. And so, we've been based in Portland for decades. And again, most people, if they know much about Portland at all, they know it's a very quirky place. It's a very liberal place, a very proudly progressive place, as our city leaders would say. And so, it really came out of this desire to communicate the good news. So Portland was a place where we experimented and tried some new things. Portland was a place where we had our first festivals, where we went from kind of the traditional Billy Graham crusade model to an outdoor music festival. And building on that, we had about 100 pastors together in 2007. And we said, what more could we do to try to build a good foundation relationally for the gospel? And so, we did something that wasn't that rocket science-y, I guess you'd say. It was kind of fairly obvious, but we'd never done it. We went to see the mayor and said, you know what, we don't want to be known primarily for being against things. We obviously can't agree with the city and folks on everything, but we want to be known primarily for what we're for and not what we're against. So if we could mobilize 15,000 Jesus followers to serve the city, what could we do? And so that led to what's now called City Serve, where hundreds of churches and tens of thousands of Christians in the Portland area actively work together to meet the needs of public schools, kids in foster care, et cetera, all to obey the Lord, love our neighbor as ourselves, but also to kind of get rid of some of the negative stereotypes that keep some people from hearing the gospel.
Wow. Let's unpack this. You obviously needed to get a base of pastors together with this idea in mind. You were going to serve a community that almost diabolical to their belief system.
Yeah, right.
How did you pull these pastors together?
In our case, it was funny. It was a God thing because we'd gotten the pastors together in the year 2000 for a big Palau festival. So trust had been built among a lot of the pastors to say, in 2000, we gathered more than 50,000 people in Waterfront Park, right in the heart of downtown Portland, to share the good news, to have a fun, family-friendly, evangelistic outreach with bands like DC Talk. I think it was DC Talk then in those days, yeah. And Skillet and Kirk Franklin, et cetera. So it's been a while since we've gotten together to share the gospel. Let's do that again. So we had this history of trust that had been built up among a lot of the pastors, and the Palau Association, we're based in Portland. So over the years, trust had been built. And the idea then was, could we not simply have a big evangelistic event, as important as that is? Could we have a more sustainable effort? Could we work together year after year after year, in addition to having the occasional big catalytic events? So trust was built, like it almost always is, relationally, lots of cups of coffee and lots of sitting down with people and building trust. And getting the pastors together. We have annual pastors' barbecues with them and their families. We do various things to try to say, or try to remind us, we may worship in slightly different ways. We may baptize in slightly different ways. But at the core, we're all united by our love for people and our love for Jesus Christ and our desire to communicate the good news. So Portland, thankfully, has a good history of unity that's been built up. I'd say part of it is because we aren't kidding ourselves. We know that Portland is a tough place for the gospel, and we need each other.
That's wonderful. All right, tell me about your first meeting with the mayor on the whole idea.
Yeah, that was an interesting one, because this is now Charlie Hales is actually the third Portland mayor that we've worked with in this process. So it began with Tom Potter, former police chief who was mayor, and Sam Adams, who at the time was a city commissioner and then mayor-elect in the beginning of the process. And then from 2008 to 2012, he really, during his term as mayor, he was very supportive of this effort. And I think what made it a little interesting for people was Sam Adams, and people, may know this, it was the first openly gay mayor of a top 20 city in the country. So that, the first meetings, it came, I think, with a little bit of fear and trepidation on both sides. From his side, it was, really? The evangelical community that I frankly associate with hating my community, they want to meet with me? I wonder what it's about. Are they here to kind of jump down my throat and express anger?
Wow.
So, there was a need for trust on both sides. We wanted to make it clear, look, we're not pretending that we're in agreement on everything. And in fact, there's a number of areas where we would clearly disagree, but we love you in the name of the Lord. You're our mayor, and we're commanded to pray for you, and we love you like we're supposed to love everybody. So trust was built as we said, you know what, we're not going to agree on everything, so let's not accentuate that. Let's disagree respectfully out of friendship, and then let's not let that stop us from working together on the things we do agree on. We want to see public schools in Portland thriving. We want to see kids in foster care better cared for. So the church had a chance to say, you know what, even when we disagree, we love you. And I think that was a message that was a little surprising for people, sad to say.
Well, so given that conversation, did you point out a particular need with the mayor that you folks wanted to address?
Well, you know what, it's funny. We really went in with a humble attitude saying, you know what, we're not the experts. The church, even though the churches, are very much in the trenches serving, we said, let's go humbly. Hey, Mayor, you know what? We're a little embarrassed that we haven't been working more actively with the city. And so we're here not to kind of pontificate and pretend we know better, but to simply say, if we could mobilize thousands of folks from our churches to serve, what would you have us do? How could we make life better? Brilliant. So really, it was a humble asking. We're not coming with an agenda. How can we serve? So once the mayor kind of said, really? Okay. The areas that were pointed out were pretty obvious ones. They're probably the obvious ones that most of those watching right now would say, okay, well, I get that. Hunger, homelessness, public education. I mean, Sam Adams came in as a mayor with a real focus on education. And, at the time, only about 55% of high school students in Portland public schools were graduating on time, which is really it's a shame. It's an embarrassment for the city, and it's not good. And so there was a real emphasis. I'd say the one that really took off was churches coming alongside public schools. I'll give you one example that continues to resonate around the country, and it's talked about in this book that I just finished, or just was published this week, called Unlikely, that tells this unlikely story of evangelical Christians working with a very progressive city and even a progressive mayor who was a member of the gay and lesbian community. So Roosevelt High School was identified by our superintendent, Carol Smith, as the neediest high school in Portland public schools. It had been built in 1922 for 2,000 students. And by the time 2008 came around, there were only 450 students left. Mm-hmm. So that meant that everyone that could have gotten their child out of Roosevelt had done it. There was no football team that could play on campus because the grandstands had been condemned. It was a very discouraging environment. So in this setting of city serve taking place, a church called Southlake, a Foursquare church, came along and said, we're looking for a way to be part of this. How can we serve? And so we said, well, the superintendent and mayor said Roosevelt High School has some needs. So what began with them doing a tremendous one-day makeover, 1,000 people from that church showed up in a very well-planned way and did a great job doing the kinds of things you can do in one day.
Wow.
Some painting and cleaning and weeding and putting down bark dust. If that's all that would have happened, praise the Lord, it would have been a big difference. It would have made a difference. But the remarkable thing was that the folks from Southlake fell in love with that community. They humbly realized that they had a lot to gain as well from just building these relationships. And so folks from Southlake kept showing up week after week, month after month, volunteering in a variety of ways. And finally, the principal, Charlene, said to Christine, who was the outreach pastor of the church, "You're here every day with folks from the church anyway. Why don't you office here?" And so now for 5 years, Southlake has had staff from the church officing at Roosevelt High School, and they now run the clothing closet, the food pantry. They help with the Head Start program. Neil Lomax, former NFL quarterback who's a member of the church, and the head of the NFL for Nike, who's a member of the church, got Nike involved. They rebuilt the track and the grandstands. Neil is the offensive coordinator for the football team now. So it's been a revolution at Roosevelt. And their graduation rate climbed 15 percentage points as they've been mentoring kids in the freshman class. They've doubled the number of students in the last 5 years. So that led the superintendent to come and say, if that's what you're talking about, would you please find us a church partner for every school in Portland Public Schools? So now there are now 300 churches that are partnering with public schools in 16 different school districts.
Oh, what a story. That's terrific. Kevin, let me take a quick break. We'll come back, and maybe you can kind of sparse other people to think about City Serve in their community. And the book is entitled Unlikely. You may want to check it out. It is put out by Howard's Books, which is a division of Simon & Schuster. And it's available in the bookstores, Amazon, online. Check it out. We'll be right back with Kevin Palau in just a moment. Hi, welcome back. And what a delight to have with us today Kevin Palau. He is the president of the Luis Palau Association up in Portland. He's authored a book called Unlikely, and I think you need to get this book and read it. First of all, it'll inspire you. Secondly, I think it almost becomes a manual of what you can do in your community as well. And it is pretty inspiring what they have done up in the Portland area. By the way, you can go to Palau, that's PALAU.org is the website. I will say this, Kevin, I know in Grants Pass, they have the concerned families that they call it Serve Grants Pass, where the community has come out and done it. Here in the Medford area, I know of one church, there may be others, but the Nazarene Church has adopted a school here. In fact, ironically enough, it's Roosevelt School, and they deal with some students. So this whole thing has really got legs, and I've heard some testimonies of teachers, administrators, principals. Their head kind of goes on tilt that the community would be there with really no agenda other than the serving. So it really has an impact.
You're right. I think at the beginning in Portland, there was a sense of, can we trust these churches? They must have some agenda. It's sad that we live in a suspicious society. Mm-hmm. There's so much polarization, and in some cases with understandable reasons. The Christian community, we may feel a bit put down. We feel like we've got to kind of stand up for what we believe, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think we've always got to be careful in how we come across. It's possible to disagree, but with genuine respect, listening more than we speak, not doing things with anger. And so, in Portland, this whole thing of partnering with schools and also jumping in with both feet into the foster care system was genuinely out of a concern that, we've kind of been painted into this corner that we're only angry and frustrated and defensive. Right. That's not a great way to win people over to what we believe, especially about the good news of Jesus Christ. Is if we're disagreeable to be around, as obvious as that is. Right. So, we found, hey, if we're simply obedient to the call of Christ to love our neighbor as ourselves, God is going to open doors for us to open our mouths and share the most important message we can ever share, which is, my life was changed by an encounter with Jesus Christ. And I would love to tell you about that. And so it's not that we're ashamed of the gospel. It's not that sharing the gospel didn't work, so let's just go and humbly serve people and maybe they'll ask us. It's a combination of the two. Yeah. It's genuinely loving people and looking and praying for opportunities to share the good news. So we haven't had to hide the gospel at all as we've been sharing and serving with city leaders.
All right. It's called City Serve. By the way, the mayor's response after you had your encounter with the school, what was his take on it?
Well, Sam, and this is old enough, history now that people may have forgotten, but when Sam Adams, who's become a genuine friend, he did the foreword to the book, which probably, which surprised people a bit. Here you've got this book by this, son of evangelist Luis Palau, president of this evangelistic organization, with a foreword by the first openly gay mayor of a top 20 city. What's that about? Mm-hmm. And so again, it's not that there was compromise. It just shows that Sam's attitude has so turned around toward the Christian community, a group that he had identified with. I mean, I hate to say this, but he didn't, had no other way to think of it than these evangelicals hate me and my community. Why would I spend time with them? Now to have him doing the foreword of the book, it's because he realized that nobody loves Portland like the Christian community. There was a lot of misunderstanding that had been kind of tossed around. Sometimes it's the media, that paint us into a corner, and sometimes it's the way we come across. But in Sam's case, he had a crisis in his life. Some of you may remember this. I'm not going to go into all the details, but he'd made a very bad mistake. He'd done something totally wrong. He would admit that himself. And in the midst of that scandal, when a lot of people, even a lot of his friends, kind of turned on him, the Christian community came alongside and didn't condone what he'd done in the slightest, but said, you know what, it doesn't change how we feel about you. Jesus Christ is full of love and grace and is open to forgiving any of us. And so Dad spent a couple hours with Sam in this time of personal crisis and was able to share the good news with him. And I think, the way that the Christian community responded in humility and grace to him in his time of need really softened his heart. And now he's publicly spoken with me at a lot of large evangelical gatherings saying, you know what? I had a lot of misinformation about the Christian community, and I realize now that the Christian community absolutely loves the broader community, and even when we disagree, we can do it respectfully. So, I long to see that attitude take hold in our country overall. Wouldn't it be great if Democrats and Republicans could disagree, but with a little more grace and respect, and things didn't devolve into the name calling that just doesn't help anybody?
I always said, in fact, I said it earlier in the show, there's 3 stages we go through. The first one is shock and awe. The next one is anger and blame. And unfortunately, most of us stay there. But if we move on, we'll go on to the next stage, which is taking personal responsibility. So I want to commend you on what you're doing here, because this is the model that I think a lot of people are looking for. And you never know. You just don't know when Sam will remember his time with your dad and you and all the churches working together. You don't know when that seed is going to pop up out of the ground.
We all know that instinctively with our own family, friends, with anybody. All we can do is plant the seed. We're not the person that can. We wish sometimes we could force that seed to sprout, don't we? We wish we could just, by sheer grit and determination, because we've experienced the joy of the gospel. We've experienced the life-transforming nature of humbly repenting, turning to Christ. We see it as nothing but a good thing. It's good news. So if we could just, grab everyone we know and help them see it, we would. The reality is everyone's got their own decision to make. And we see it especially, of course, in our own families, sometimes with our own kids or grandkids. And so to be able to sometimes take a deep breath, trust the Lord, keep praying like crazy, look for opportunities to keep watering that seed, but, to have that calm confidence that God's in control. One of the things we've seen that's really changed in Portland as the churches have been loving and serving, I'd say there's a greater confidence in the gospel on the part of thousands of Jesus followers in Portland. There's a sense of confidence. You know what? We're one body. Doesn't matter what the label is in our church. If we love Jesus Christ, if we trust God's word, we're part of one community. Let's live that way. There's a confidence that comes from saying, you know what? We're not the pariahs of Portland anymore. We've built up trust and respect with the mayor's office, with our city and county commissioners, with school superintendents. We had a gathering just last week with 80 principals from Portland Public Schools and 100 pastors at the invitation of the school superintendent to get to know each other and to build relationships between pastors and principals. How does that happen? It happens when we act as we should and love and serve people even that we disagree with, not being afraid that we're compromising. You know what? Our light will shine. We don't have to compromise, but we do have to listen, love and find common ground with people, and God will open the door for us to share the good news.
Wow. I only got a couple of minutes left, Kevin, but let me ask you this. What's the biggest message you want people to take away from your book?
I guess I would say is don't get angry and don't get discouraged, because I think those are two things that we can really tend to feel as we look at the direction that the country's going. Some of us, maybe we remember what feels like the good old days, and it can be frightening, which can tempt us to be kind of hunker down and kind of, be insular and focus everything just on our community, kind of sit in our church and kind of, say, well, Jesus is going to come back soon, Lord willing, or, what, eventually I'll go be in heaven. That's not what God's called us to do. We're called to seek the peace and prosperity of this city or community that God's brought you to. Don't be afraid and don't be angry. Don't be angry at people that disagree with you. Jesus clearly modeled for us, we're supposed to love our enemies. We're supposed to turn the other cheek. It doesn't mean that we don't express lovingly and kindly what we believe, but it means that anger is not the way of the follower of Christ. So don't be angry and defensive. Don't be afraid. Be joyfully bold in living out your faith, which in a lot of cases starts with humbly serving. Go to your school principal nearby, maybe with some people from your church, or better yet, get a little group of churches together and find some simple ways that you can let your light shine by loving and serving, and pray then for opportunities to answer that question. Why are you doing this? Because Jesus Christ has changed my life, and the open doors can be there. And so, it's not rocket science. It's pretty obvious. It's a biblical way to live. But if it can happen in Portland, Oregon, in kind of quirky, crazy Portlandia, where 8,000 people ride their bikes naked through the streets, it can probably happen anywhere.
What an inspiration. All right, the book is entitled Unlikely, and it got put out by Howard Books. There's a picture of it on the screen for those watching on the Dove TV. Check it out. Get it. It's a manual, it's an inspiration, and it's a model of what can be done. Hey, Kevin, you're a delight. Let's connect more often, okay?
That'd be great. And you know what? Hey, we're doing the biggest effort in our history in New York City, July 11th, Central Park.
Whoa.
This same thing's happening in New York City, where churches are serving. So anyway, we'd love it.
We'll be praying for you guys.
Thanks.
Best to you and your dad and your family, okay?
Thank you so much.
All right, blessings. All right, we'll see you next time on Focus Today.